Nazis have nearly captured Moscow, but then a new Soviet tank appears on the horizon, unlike anything they have ever seen. And its proportions and armament are ridiculous. This monster tank rode into battle on an extra long tank bed, allowing it to field 5 big cannons, 18 machine guns, 15 rocket launchers, and just for overkill, 2 flamethrowers. But behind the crazy story of this super tank is an even crazier truth, one that we need to sort from fact or fiction. In today's lighter episode, we'll be looking at one of the most insane tank creations ever dreamed up, both real and fake, and exploring what could have been. Roll out today with Stalin's Orchestra, the Soviet land battleship, or better known simply as the KV-6, behemoth. In July of 1941, Stalin was informed about a tank that single-handedly held off an entire 6th Panzer Division at the Battle of Rassane on June 24th. The tank, depending on the sources, was either a KV-1 or KV-2. The Battle of Rassane was actually a disaster for the Soviets, but the KV-1 in general proved to be able to handle German tanks well because it was well armoured. Further variants were also made with better guns and manoeuvrability to counter the rising tide of German Tiger and Panther tanks, and the KV was chosen as a basis because it proved to be a good tank in the first stages of the war. Now, the interesting development was that each of these tanks was designed around the same chassis, turrets, and engines, necessitated by the urgency imposed by Stalin and the strains on the Soviet industry caused by the German invasion of Russia. Apparently, the engineers at this point realized that if they put all the components together, they could create one giant tank. It would take the same amount of time to build, but would have considerably more firepower. Thus, the behemoth was born. Dubbed as a land battleship, this tank would have had 3 major turrets over an elongated tank tread, approximately 51 feet long. Despite concerns from designers about the impractical length of this vehicle, due to the insistence on 3 turrets, Stalin dismissively declared, "It doesn't need to turn, it will simply drive straight to Berlin." Due to its considerable weight, the tank was also equipped with wading devices enabling it to traverse rivers up to 9 feet deep. Additionally, a removable observation tower was designed to direct fire of howitzers and rockets for when the tank was in a turret-down position. Now, let's talk all about its firepower. It would have a normal KV-1 turret at the front of the tank, although with double 14.5mm autocannons in the smaller turret on top. Behind it was the main turret, a modified KV-2 turret armoured with not one, but 2 152mm cannons, with a smaller BT-5 turret on top of that armed with a 45mm cannon. The ammo for it was stored behind in the turret. The rear turret would again be taken from a KV-1 armed with a 76.2mm gun, but with a twist. On top of it, there would be a rack of Katyusha rockets that would be mounted for extra firepower. Of course, there were also several machine guns throughout and 2 flamethrowers at the front. To operate such a large machine, the engineers proposed 15 crew members with 2 powerful 16 horsepower engines at the rear. Despite its power, the top speed was only 13 miles per hour thanks to how heavy and how fuel hungry it was. But with this crazy design, it earned the nickname Stalin's Orchestra from the few Germans who encountered it, owing to the array of weapons that it deployed. So in this historical account, did this tank ever see any action? Well, apparently, 3 were built. The first prototype, allegedly completed in December of 1941, was hastily deployed in the defense of Moscow. During its inaugural action in dense winter fog, the rear turret accidentally fired into the center turret, resulting in a catastrophic explosion that obliterated the vehicle. The second prototype, finished in January of 1942, was sent to the Leningrad front and featured indicators on the turret aiming sights to prevent it from firing on itself. Unfortunately, it broke in half while crossing a ravine, unable to sustain the weight of the central turret, and had to be blown up to prevent capture. The third prototype, reinforced and sent to the Leningrad front in early 1942, managed to shoot down 3 German aircraft using its autocannons. However, during its first ground engagement, all the guns fired from the 3 o'clock position simultaneously, and the tremendous recoil caused the tank to tip over sideways into a ditch where it was immobilized. Following these setbacks, Stalin terminated the project and refocused efforts on just producing multiple smaller tanks to outflank the enemy. So let's have a little break to talk about this tank and be an armchair armored expert into why such a wacky design couldn't possibly exist. Honestly, there are so many flaws with this design that I just don't know where to begin. For one, it was so heavy and fuel hungry. It would be so slow to get to the front lines operating at that tiny top speed, and it would also require a constant train of fuel trucks to refuel it. Also, it would struggle to drive over any terrain. Even pure concrete roads would crumble under its sheer weight, and I don't want to even think about mud or swampy conditions. They said that it could wade across a river with some special flotation devices, but I find that incredibly hard to believe for such a heavy vehicle. Simply put, there is no point to have a treaded vehicle if all the ground has the consistency of peanut butter. There are also so many points of failure with this machine that any mechanics watching would realize that it would be in the shop year round. You've also got to see this from a strategic point of view that it was majorly weak to one significant threat: aircraft. You could spend weeks building this tank that could go up against the very best Nazi armor, but a single plane could pound it into oblivion, and the sheer size of this tank made it an instant target on the battlefield. Plus, I love to imagine the sheer logistics of being this tank commander. How would you exactly aim and fire this tank with so many crew members and so many different rotating and moving pieces? Would the commander be like target A, attack, and then turret 2, target B? It would be a headache for anyone involved. Plus, I imagine if the tank needed to be recovered from the battlefield, you would need a serious tractor to pull it out of the mud. And I think for all intents and purposes, it's very obvious why this tank could never exist. So where on earth does this idea come from? Well, I have some bad news. It actually isn't from 1942, but rather 1995. A model maker by the name of Brian Fowler decided to have a go making a new inspiration of a Soviet tank using spare parts from his model kit. And then of course the internet got their hands on it, with DeviantArt user Von Breuer made a whole history to go along with the pictures, including much of the work in today's video. Now, I get it, you might think that this is a little unfair that we didn't spill the beans till the very end of the video, but it's a fantastic concept tank, and I think we can all agree that the only difference from its creation from a model maker to an actual engineer in the Soviet army is just time. After all, World War II dictators were pretty wacky, and very likely had they known about this concept, they would have asked for it to be put on the front line. And of course, by this, I don't just mean Stalin. If you think this was just a joke and could never work, well, I have some bad, or rather good news for you, because the Nazis actually proposed several iterations of a super heavy tank by the end of World War II, which we've actually already covered here on the channel in a separate video, so you can go watch it here right now. Thanks for watching.